I want to talk about women in marriage and ministry, and it seemed to be kind of the obvious thing to talk about, and I thought I'd start by just because I see it sort of as a sub problem of a greater problem, and that is hierarchy, any hierarchy. Um, a hierarchy, it's really confusing, and sometimes I feel like I never explain myself very well. Um, when it seems like on Facebook I'm always trying to pull things down to not make people feel like I have a negative attitude about the church. I mean, somebody could really easily get that impression from me after a while. Um, but to me, what's confusing is that the idea of a hierarchy, I looked it up, and it said arranging people according to their importance. So what's confusing is that, in some like settings, a hierarchy can be not harmful, and it can also be an effective way to accomplish a task. So this is kind of where we get confused. I think a great deal of the problem of dead religion is getting this confused. That if you take a hierarchy and then spiritualize it and marry it with the core identity of people, then hierarchy is a problem. Then we die. It's a big problem. It's a cult. That is what makes a cult. It's when you take a hierarchy and you marry that into anyone's core identity. So the big problem I see with evangelicalism, and the difficulty for me personally ever trying to fit in, has always come down to this issue, and so it's really hard to center a discussion about this without people then kind of going to the other extreme and saying, well, you just want to tear everything down. Oh. And you just want to destroy everything, and it isn't true that if you were able to take the poison out of hierarchy and understand it, how it basically a healthy hierarchy would just be where people got organized because they wanted to accomplish something, and we are given different gifts and different callings, and so if we have no organization at all, then we just have a mess. And so it seems to me like evangelicalism kind of went way, the other side, and started saying things like, touch not God's anointed, and understanding that the wrong way, and really setting people up as actual spiritual mediators between us and God. But we enabled it as well, so nobody has to say, yes to such a thing, but a lot of us do, most of us, that have been through that mill, said yes to that, and and it ended up costing us, decades, really, of loss that we're now, trying to recover from, and calculating those losses. And there were good things too, so it wasn't all bad. A lot of things did get accomplished, but a lot of people never really got to be who they were actually created to be. Because it's not good for anybody in the hierarchy. I mean, it certainly isn't very good for people who manage to make it to the top, because you just see a lot of people burning out and getting hurt and getting attacked, and if we set somebody up to be God, other than God, then we're just going to be attacking them when they turn out not to be God. And likewise, they're just going to get burned out trying to be God because they're not. So hierarchy, man, it's a big thing in Western evangelicalism. It's everything. I was amazed, like how much when I started doing notes. I don't do this very often, so there's a small amount of terror involved in this. But I was amazed because, like, for when I finally said, Caleb, I think I'll take a shot at this, and then for days I sat down to write my 3-point structure, like as a good speech class student. And I couldn't get very much, but then just in the last couple of days I got so much that it was just overwhelming, and I had to just quit. I felt like, gosh, I could just talk about this for weeks. There's just so much to talk about in this thing that we've done, hierarchy. So we're not supposed to lord it over people, and the greatest in the kingdom shall serve. So Scripture addresses, our tendency to want to build hierarchy over and over and over, and it really only seems to build hierarchy in a few little tiny places. And one of the things that really eroded, I actually don't know what to call it. For lack of a better term, I've called it evangelicalism, but that, you know what I mean. It doesn't really encompass it. I don't know whether to call it evangelicalism or Calvinism or or retributive religion, or I don't know whatever that was. One of the big things that eroded it was just looking at Scripture for myself. And the picture I got from just opening it, just as a complete hack, I mean, just me and a Strong's, which seemed very intimidatingly thick, but just from opening these books up for the first time, the picture I started to get immediately was not what I was taught, and a lot of it. Well, this is one of the main things. It's like, how can we base like our self identity, the core, of who we are, on all these hierarchy talking points, when there's so much in this book that clearly, even though I try never to use that word anymore, the Bible clearly, but it just seems plain that it's telling us not to build hierarchies or lord it over anybody. So, and like if you can, probably most people here can put yourself back in your state of mind when you were back there, and the way you saw it's just amazing, because you saw yourself as so little tiny with no voice at all, and you saw these big, wise kings, and you could, if you were in a room with them, which I was because of my job going around the world really for decades, and I was in lots of rooms with lots of like mega ministers, and didn't ever really want to bring myself to talk because they seemed like very opaque people, So that mind is a mindset I can return to. I can remember what that felt like. But then here was this book, telling me that maybe, greatness wasn't in opacity, and so, you finally get to a point where you start getting a little older and then start asking yourself questions like, well, when do I get to bloom? Or when do I get to grow up? Or it seems to me like growing up is actually a very threatening thing that maybe we're not allowed to do. So, and all this has to do with hierarchy and maintaining hierarchy. So, we're not supposed to lord it over anybody, but simply through loving and serving to encourage the essence of each other out. And this is an uber overriding mega omni level 1 biblical principle. So it doesn't have integrity to go find some jot or tittle somewhere in the backside of somebody's letter in there and build a whole case for these big things not being true. So a lot of this stuff started to fall apart for me 20 years ago when I first got married to Don, because we went to this church and he preached this message on women. And it was just absolutely horrifying. And he was saying, that women are certainly we're free to disobey our husbands, but we're free to sin, and we're and he did this long sermon on comparing a marriage to a corporation, and by the end of it I was like traumatized. And here I've got this new marriage, and so already you can imagine that I've experienced a total, failure of life, and certainly a failure of most of the most important, demands of performance-based evangelicalism, or whatever that is. So I failed. I got an F- already just being in a second marriage. And so okay, we're going to pull this together, and we're going to go to this new little church, and then this. And I was just a mess, and I was crying, and I felt so guilty. And says, here I'm going to bring another failure into the family, but I don't care. I can't go back to that church, and I certainly don't want to raise my daughter there, And so shortly after that, wait, I better make sure I'm all done with this page. Oh, well, I'll have to come back to that. So I felt from the Lord like I was supposed to study all the verses in the New Testament about women. So at first I just thought that sounded like a big homework assignment, and I wasn't very excited about it, because I thought, well, I don't need to wear army boots and look all this stuff up. I know who I am, and you, yeah, like, great. So, but I did start doing it, and this is what was so life-changing for me, to sit down. I mean, one of the things I realized doing this is that the way people go on, I don't think very many people do this. I mean, read it, for themselves, like with study books. A lot of the problem of Christianity is people don't read it. They just parrot who's ever reading it for them. And I was so encouraged by, again, I'll repeat, I was a hack, never done anything like this before, but it went a long way to redeeming the Bible for me, because of seeing such different things in the Greek words than I saw in the English word. In fact, at one point, I actually gave one version the gift of flight. I was so mad. I can't believe this! I thought the church was against sex change, but they gave Juno a sex change operation. Junio, because she started out as Junia, listed with the apostles. And like blatant stuff like that, and so I didn't want to get like, deeply into a Bible study, because I don't feel completely qualified to do that. But I did want to tell you about one verse that I looked up, and I hope I got this right. But it was so life-changing for me. When I looked in I think it's Ephesians 6. I don't know even if I got the chapter right. But it's that whole case that seems pretty open and shut for women being a lower life form. Where Paul says for us to submit to our husbands. And so I was just looking at that, and at first it does come off like that. Cursory reading makes you curse. And first of all, I was amazed that the discussion starts out anyway, submit yourselves one to another. That's how it starts out. And then the rest of the discussion, he's trying to explain this in the context of his culture, which is already very restrictive for women. It's not something Paul created. It's like if I had unlimited, omnipotent power, I would probably go find a way to end Monsanto. But I don't. And so Paul, in this passage, he doesn't try to end slavery either, but he does free slaves, in a different way. He heals. He can't march up to the government and free all the slaves. But that doesn't mean that he's for slavery, And so in this passage where he's telling women to submit to their husbands, believe me, they already do. They already do. But then what comes after that is kind of obscured. And he talks to the husbands about loving the wife as Christ loved the church and as he presented himself a bride. And what really did it for me was the word present. When I looked that up, it means beside standing. Sweet. Beside standing. And so this was just like life-changing for me because to me, it brought health and balance and clarity to that whole passage. And how hard would that have been to translate that as he stood the bride next to himself, instead of saying the word present, which we would not understand unless we happen to look it up. I don't know. This to me, it just kind of, once again, it sort of undermined the things that I had been taught about my own self-identity, but it really kind of made Paul my hero, in a way. And right on that word, all hierarchy disappeared for me. I mean, like what I started with, talking about more like hierarchy in general and how that can be damaging. When I saw that word, besides standing, and several other things begin to light up in Scripture, like Jesus saying, I didn't come to call you slaves, but friends. And then I realized why it's so hard with this women thing to address it and see change, because it's so embedded in such a petrified worldview of hierarchy. And that was the time when I figured out that there's none of this, there's not a permanent spiritual domination type hierarchy in the Trinity. That was my guess. And I felt like that was so important that I felt like if there was a hierarchy in the Trinity, like the unhealthy kind, that the universe would shrivel up and die. That's how important that is. And the reason is because a hierarchy, whether we have it in the church or whether we have it in a marriage or a family or wherever it exists, the unhealthy kind of hierarchy always implies a goal orientation. That's what hierarchies are for. Why have one if there's nothing to do? So it implies a goal orientation. And so not only does it imply a goal orientation, but it implies a goal priority. over relationship. So that's where we die, by imposing our particular goal, which of course is to make converts out of the entire world. And that's what locks women into the submission thing, because we're cogs in that. I mean, everybody is. It's a myth to say that the submission thing for women is a system created by men for taking advantage of women. It isn't. You know, it's really maintained by everybody. It's created by all of us. It's created by human nature, separate from God. And so we all maintain it. And just checking to make sure I get all of this. What I've seen is that sometimes women themselves work really hard at maintaining the hierarchy, because we get, okay, let's see if I can find my notes of what we get. This is very disorganized, and I even had to rip a hole out of one of the papers so I could draw Dylan a dinosaur. So, we get some stuff from the submission of women thing. The women get some stuff. Not that it's healthy stuff. None of it is healthy, but we do get some stuff. We get to kind of abdicate our responsibility. We get clear title to anyone in the hierarchy that's under us. Sadly, a lot of times that's our children. You know, and we get kind of a false security. I know for myself, personally, I totally used that system for the first, I don't know how many decades of my Christianity. And when I realized this, it was probably good for me because I probably won't ever be too inclined to stay very long in a blame mode, which if you are getting into blame, I mean, if a woman gets into blame, then hierarchy wins, you know. If you get into blame, that's just another way to abdicate responsibility, because it isn't that at all. It's just a matter of learning what it is to be human. And so whether it's cost you a few years or a few decades like it cost me, it's just learning what the gospel is and what it isn't. And however you spend your days learning how the gospel isn't, you've invested in learning what it is, haven't you? So you just don't stop, you know, or you don't get mad, because if you get mad, then that's where you stay. That's where you get stuck, and you're still involved in it, you know. So you just chalk it up. That's what you have to do. You just chalk it up and go on. Okay, I'm going to lose my place if I reorganize this. Okay. Okay, so I did this study in Ephesians 6, and my life was just utterly changed. And there wasn't anything like this context to feel these things in. So I went over to Don, and I started talking to him about this. And what I said, because I had no idea how to put all this, so what I said was, look, if I am wrong, and the Bible does say that I'm your love slave for life, so I'm okay with that. But I don't think that is what it says. And at first he was like, well, I don't see this at all. But after looking at it together for a while, I can remember what he said. He said, oh, this is such a relief. I get to be your friend instead of your God. You know, and so that was when we stepped into, I guess, what's now called, I don't know, an equal marriage, I guess. We didn't have any definitions for it. So, but it's wonderful, because I had the other kind too, and I'm not saying that you know, that it dooms every other marriage, because it doesn't. It did that one, but I do really believe that that we damage marriages greatly, starting with most of our wedding ceremonies. You know, and the last wedding I went to, I could barely make myself stay in the building because of the baggage handed that couple in that, and they were just swallowing it, like young people. And I think that we kill marriages by handing them this hierarchy from the word go. So I need to spend just a moment, I think, about that, and talk more about why hierarchy is so hard on us. I think that we sort of default to hierarchies when we're not based on relationship. So the degree to which we've created a petrified tree, trying to create a tree, we've made a petrified tree, or to the degree we've created something that has an external structure but isn't the real thing, is huge when it comes to this. Because if you set somebody under somebody else permanently according to a gender that they were born with, or for any other reason, if you don't have that reason, that person can't become and can't contribute, can't live the life that they're meant to live, and they can't relate to you directly across. They can't relate to anybody under them in the hierarchy directly across, or above them in the hierarchy, if the hierarchy has been spiritualized and married with our core identity. So I really love something Don did. He just had his piece of paper, and he said, well, this is kind of like how, the structure we've built, and he built this triangle. And he said, but this is the way I see it. And he drew a circle, and he put a dot in the middle, and he said, this dot in the middle is Jesus, and everybody's around the outside, but anybody can go close to the dot or back, or anybody can be as close to the dot as they want. And so another thing about hierarchy that I want to throw out and say, and this wasn't in my notes, which is kind of troubling because this might mean I could go too long. If I start thinking of things that aren't in my notes, that could be I'm losing my terror. Nope, I'm not losing it. What was I going to say? I told a joke and I forgot. I'll just interrupt one of the speakers tomorrow when I remember it. Okay, so, oh Lord, where am I? Okay, so did I finish this page? A marriage is going to yes. Okay, so I think you have to come to the point of what can we do about it? So it's like, how do you in deconstructing all this stuff, then how do you go forward? And for me, for a little while, this was truly a really, really big question, because when I saw the size of the damage, I was paralyzed with anger, truly. And I think about that is that in a way, it's probably a good thing to allow yourself a little time to deal with some anger. Not to try to too quickly not be angry, because it's a pretty damaging thing. It's a bad thing, and you spend a lot of time. I mean, I think in my own life, I actually just went ahead and freely denied myself looking at the loss, calculating the loss from those decades, because I knew that if I tried to look at it all at once. It would be pretty overwhelming. And this is part of, oh gosh, I remembered something else I wanted to say. That moment when I looked at the present word and saw that it meant beside standing, I looked up and I went, oh my gosh, hell is a scam too. And that's when I started being an inclusionist. And there wasn't even that word. You had to use the word universalist. No, I don't want to be one of those. But wait, yes, I do. I actually don't want billions of people to burn in hell forever. You know? So what's not to like is my question about that. You know, what is up with this? Anyway, okay, so you can tell now that was a really life-changing moment, and I've felt like if such a big scam could be done on women, you know, it would be no problem to do a hell scam. No problem at all. And books have flown left and right ever since that day. So I think it's okay to let yourself be mad for a while, you know, because I think it's part of assessing reality, of entering back into reality. You're going to be angry. You're going to be very angry. That's okay. You just have to be careful that you don't stay there, you know, because it's pretty much always been this way. You just didn't know it, or you just didn't see it, or you denied it or something. You can get rid of anger in really creative ways. I've learned how to get rid of anger. I give myself time and stages. I give myself stages. And I think of things like, I could be angry that people are killing whales. It's kind of selfish to be angry of something that just specifically happened to me. That's selfish. I should be angry at kids starving, you know, so I deal with anger partly that way, you know, but I allow myself some time to feel angry because I was raised as such a pink, fluffy, evangelical woman that I wasn't allowed to be angry at anything or to have very much of an opinion. So I was mad about that. And by the way, I don't think that we should disarm our daughters like that. I was completely disarmed. And that wasn't really fair for me. We do need some warrior women in some senses. We kind of need to teach our daughters that they are very responsible for their own lives. And they have the ability to make choices, and that they will bear the consequences of the choices, good and bad, that's life. And it was like a really big message to teach us to wear pink fluffy slippers and everything was going to be okay, and all we had to do was learn to play the piano or the guitar. If we were slightly rebellious, we'd learn the guitar instead of the piano. And it doesn't prepare our daughters for reality at all, you know? And so this was very difficult for me to take up talking about any of this. There was just so much to climb out of. Okay, so how am I doing? When is this supposed to end? Okay, so you can't get into blaming anybody. You can't blame the church. You can't blame religion, because this is not a religious problem. Religion is where we take a lot of things that are just kind of default aspects of human nature, and we spiritualize them instead of dealing with them and looking for better ways. So that, you know, religion, maybe that's a fault in our religion, but the problem doesn't come from religion. This problem is in corporations and native tribes and big cities, and it's anywhere you want to look at it. Not just a woman having a generally lower position in hierarchy, but hierarchy in general. You know, if a big corporation doesn't spiritualize it, maybe they make it a matter of ego or self-identity some other way. But in religion, we're supposed to be dealing with this and freeing people from these kind of things. So, but you can't get mad at religion because really it's human nature, and if you get mad at human nature, you're just going to get mad at yourself. So, okay. So now I'm really getting down to the end. Was that 5 minutes or longer? Have I only been going for 5 minutes? I have already really appreciated the teachings in the conference so far, and how I've just heard so many invitations for women, for everybody. Speakers can do that. It's amazing how women disqualify themselves, trained to disqualify themselves. To listen to common things that come out of the mouth of speakers, and just to think that doesn't apply to me because I'm a woman. So it's a little bit hard for me to think back because I've honestly been out of that a long time. So it doesn't affect me much anymore, or my days. I go to church here. We don't have that problem here. It's not in the message. We've been this place of fellowship here is such a gift. We moved here to go to this fellowship. And we just love it, and you have no idea how I love it. Just to be in a place where you can be is just so wonderful. It's so rare. So, okay. So oftentimes, it only takes a sentence for a speaker to invite the other half of the human race into the things that they're saying. Occasionally, the Lord might prompt you to say, oh, and by the way, this is true for women too, not just men. And then this thing is just, you'll have to bear with me because I'm just saying this because I've just always wanted to say this into a microphone. Authors don't write a book about leadership and then say, it's important for your leadership career to marry the right woman. Just don't do that. Somewhere in England, people saw a book flying out of a hotel room. In fact, just don't write a leadership book at all, okay? Because those all make me barf. And while you're at it, don't write a servant leadership book either. Just write a servant book. Okay, so I would like to close with this. Really, I'm serious. Did I go more than 15 minutes? All right. There's something down even underneath the hierarchy thing that I see, at least this is what I think, that basically a hierarchy is built to shield us from life because we have no courage. And when I realized that about myself, it was like, oh gosh, I had a really intense moment in my life where I was sitting in a car with all of my belongings and a 9-year-old daughter, having just fled a marriage and having no idea where I was going to go. And talk about a scary deal. And in that moment, I told God, I have nothing. I have nothing. I have nothing. Except I didn't have nothing. I had a responsibility that I loved very much in a daughter. That was making it a lot harder. It would have been easier if it had just been me. I said, I have nothing. And I just kept saying that to God. I have nothing. I have nothing, God. And I was so scared. And then I said, well, I have you. I mean, I have nothing except you. I have nothing but God. wait a minute. I have nothing but the God of the universe? I said that. And then that's when he showed me my hierarchy, my system. Layers and layers and layers that I had constructed in between me and God, because I was so scared of God. He showed me like this, it was like this building with floors that weren't filled in. And I just went, oh, I am so sorry. This will never happen again. And the same time I saw that, I realized in every single case, it became clear as a bell why I put those people in those positions and how I was blaming them for failing to be God. So underneath hierarchy, I believe, is courage. And I think that building hierarchies of false relationship is our antidote for fearing to face life. And so it's kind of a chicken and egg thing. You know, after a while, the religion functions to keep you there. But we've all been given life. We have this one time on earth. There's nobody like us, any of us. Nobody is going to live your life if you don't do it. You know? And there is nothing in Scripture that keeps you from doing that. We've been made to think everything in Scripture keeps us from doing that because it tells us we're evil. But that's not true. We're not evil. We were made by God, and He called everything good. And we're weird. That's what we are. We're not evil. We're just really weird. We get broken. We get destructive. But we're predictable. But we're unpredictable. And we're artistic. And we're dark. And we're light. We're all that. If we weren't all that, we would be really boring. And God, I'm sure, wouldn't have bothered creating us. So there isn't anything to keep you from being you. There's no spiritual thing to keep you from being you. The whole idea of sin isn't an offense. It's just anything that keeps you from being you and keeps other people from being others. That damages you and it damages them, and that's why God doesn't like it. That's all. That's all sin ever was. So that's what I want to leave you kind of with today, is just the idea that that there's a circle with a point in it, and we're all in an equal place, and we all have gifts. We shouldn't impoverish ourselves. That's what I forgot. Yes. Hierarchy impoverishes all of us, because when we can't be ourselves, then that denies riches and abundance to ourselves and to the whole. So, I feel so much better that I remember that. I guess I must have been meant to close with that or something. But love you guys.